except maybe one. One possible out. Maybe it's true that people are born homosexual, therefore their natural inclination is for members of the same sex, and therefore this verse doesn't apply to them because they are not burning unnaturally, but they're burning naturally. Let's see whether that's a good interpretation given the text. What if one's natural desire is for the same sex? There are 5 different reasons why this is a bad argument. I'll give you all 5. The first 4 are good ones. They're good reasons against this argument. You can take away all 4 of those, give me the 5th one. The 5th one is unassailable. The 5th reason absolutely and completely destroys this argument. First reason is this. The court is still out on scientific evidence. In other words, in asking the question, is there such a thing as constitutional homosexuality, the answer is we don't know. Yes, there's been some evidence that seems to indicate it. There's also some other evidence, contrary evidence, that seems to indicate the other, and you don't hear about that, unfortunately. Also, if you're at all involved in the scientific community, you know you don't establish a scientific rule or law based on 1 or 2 studies, overnight, as it were. These things take time because there are a lot of factors that are involved, including the bias of researchers that can get in on either side of the issue, and that's why we can't draw conclusions until a lot more work has been done. So first of all, the scientific court is out on that. Secondly, so in other words, it's not even sure that there is such a thing as people born with homosexuality. Secondly, the so-called genetic argument is a non-argument because it commits the naturalistic fallacy. In other words, you can't get an ought from an is. Here's the point. Just because a person may be, even if we were willing to concede this, born with a particular desire, it doesn't follow from that that one ought to be allowed to pursue that desire. If you think about it for a moment, virtually every law that deals with activity on the books keeps you from doing what comes natural. I'm hungry. That's a natural desire. I'll walk over to Lucky's and have a lunch. Well, you have to pay first. No, I don't. It's a natural desire. This person cut me off in the freeway. I'm going to pull over and punch his lights out. I'm not only going to punch his lights out, I'm going to punch him out. Well, you can't do that. Yeah, why not? It's a natural desire. I was created that way. Apparently, people with XYY chromosomes have a natural inclination to violence. Are we to argue then, because they have a natural inclination to violence, that they ought not be punished and we ought to allow them to do what they want because it's natural? What kind of argument is that? Morality is based on the notion that human beings have free will and make moral decisions consciously about their behavior, going against the grain of their natural inclination. It is a non-argument to say, because I feel like doing it and it's natural, therefore I ought to do it. It commits the naturalistic fallacy. Third, this interpretation introduces an entirely new concept that is completely foreign to the text. Paul doesn't seem to be talking about constitutional homosexuality here. There's no mention to it. There's no reference to it. There is no additional verse that says, oh, by the way, if your natural inclination is for the members of the same sex, then don't you burn unnaturally towards the opposite sex. Where is that verse? Dr. Hart goes on to say that Paul probably doesn't even understand homosexuality. Well, his argument shoots itself in the foot, because if Paul doesn't understand about constitutional homosexuality, how is it that Paul is writing here in a way that accepts constitutional homosexuality? You see what I'm saying? If Paul doesn't know about it, then why can you say that's what Paul's talking about? If he doesn't know about it, he can't talk about it. Dr. Hart's argument commits suicide. He's impaled on his own spear. It doesn't work. Fourth reason. This interpretation creates another problem. If all who have a desire for the same sex do so naturally, then who does this verse apply to? Who climbs in bed with a member of the opposite sex who doesn't have any desire to do so? And if all the desire that one has towards sex is something that's natural, then where is anybody that violates this verse? Paul is talking to himself. Except for possibly, maybe the only people he's talking to are those who are bisexual. because then clearly you can't have both sexual preferences, I presume. Maybe you could. I don't know. I haven't heard that argument. But one thing I have never heard is anyone who argues this way about this passage who then in the same breath condemns bisexuality. Where is that condemnation? It seems to me to follow naturally from the text if you really hold that interpretation. Those are the four good arguments why that can't apply. Here's the fifth one that you can take all the rest of them and throw them in the trash can as far as I'm concerned. This one nails it. Because Paul was not unclear about what he meant by natural. Let's read verse 26 again and again. I'm quoting precisely from the New American Standard. For this reason, God gave them over to degrading passions, for their women exchanged the natural function for that which is unnatural. And in the same way also the men abandoned the natural function of the woman and burned in their desire towards one another. The word function is the Greek word krisis. It occurs only 2 times in the New Testament, both times here. It occurs many times outside of the New Testament. It means one thing. It means function. Especially with regards to sexuality. Paul is not talking about natural desires being exchanged here principally. Paul is talking about natural functions being violated. Natural is not determined by what you want sexually, it's determined by how you function sexually. The body was built to function in a specific way, and men were not built to function sexually with other men. Natural desires go with natural functions. That's what Paul is arguing here. And the passion that exchanges the natural function of sex for the unnatural function is what Paul calls a degrading passion. And Jesus makes it very clear what the natural function is. He says in Matthew 19:4-5, "Have you not read that he who created them from the very beginning made them male and female? And said, for this cause a man shall leave his mother and father and shall cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." That's sexual intercourse there. The desire is unnatural, Paul says, because it abandons the natural function. Extramarital heterosexual sex is wrong because it exploits the natural function in an immoral way. But homosexuality is worse, and yes, I do believe it is. Why? Because it goes beyond. It's an immoral act based on a perversion of a natural function. That's why this argument cannot survive. Even if somebody has a natural desire for a member of the same sex, by their perspective, they can never have a natural function because their bodies don't fit that way, and nature itself tells us that. And if their bodies don't fit that way, Paul says that defines what the natural desire is. The desire, therefore, is an unnatural one and comes under the condemnation of God.